Vladimir Putin's nuclear shield just blew up in front of his own country. On November 28th, a missile at Russia's Yasny base blew up and turned the sky over Orenburg violet colored. This was not Ukraine nor NATO, but Russia's own strategic missile forces failing in front of the world. People there heard a heavy blast and watched a toxic cloud rise over the nuclear base deep inside of Russia. In Moscow, officials gave no responses to what happened, other than to say that there was no threat to the public and that, quote, this was a routine event, which most likely it is. Because when the sky above a nuclear site starts to change color and your government goes silent, that's undoubtedly a sign that there's nothing to worry about. The Kremlin today, though, is losing control. And that's something that its population sees. But more than that, Russia is losing its ability to use nuclear deterrence. Today, for Russia, its situation has become ever more precarious. My name is Jason Smart. I'm a special correspondent for the Kyiv Post and a national security advisor. The Russian situation is incredible to watch. It is one disaster after another, and somehow they keep coming. The hits just keep coming. So let's take a look at that today. Let's look at what's going on inside of Russia, why it's going so wrong, and how Ukraine is responding to this, and why today it is Russia that is suffering and needs a deal, not Ukraine, which leads to another thing. Help us get this message to more people. As you know, Ukraine is being forced into negotiations right now, and there is a lot of pressure. But the world needs to understand, Ukraine does not need a bad deal. It is Russia today that is not winning. Here in Ukraine, where I am right now, the people are still optimistic about the future. They still wish to defeat Russia. And so the world needs to understand what is truly happening. You can help me get the truth to the world to support Ukraine by doing these simple things. Please subscribe to this channel, like this video, and consider becoming a channel member today. Please do also leave your comments below and share this video with others. I greatly appreciate it. So let's take a look at this. So as you know, Yasny is not a little dot on the map of massive Russia. It is one of the pillars of Russia's nuclear arsenal. This is where the garrison for the 13th Red Banner Rocket Division is located. That is, of course, a core part of the strategic missile forces. The division is reported to host silo bases around Moscow. They are always advertising themselves as being invincible and the most modern of the modern in Russia. But earlier leaks from the same complex exposed detailed outlines of what's going on there. We see where their tunnels are, their cables are, their security systems, and how they function. We know quite a bit about what happens at Yasny, but now what happened there just recently is a little bit of a mystery. The sky there turned a different color, and the Kremlin tried to lie about it. That part's probably not surprising. But the fact today, there's something else. When the most secret part of the military shows failure in public, the myth of perfect control begins to break. Now, for nuclear planners in NATO and in Kyiv, this is not drama. This is a hard data point. Something serious went wrong at a key Russian site. Now, for Vladimir Putin, this combination could not have come at a worse time because it is at a base that he cannot afford to lose, but it's about a truth that he cannot afford to admit. Russia's strategic forces now show a pattern of visible failures. This is not a one-off bad time in Orenburg. You might remember back in 2024, the satellite images that came out showing that fresh, deep crater that was in the Plesetsk area. Now, Plesetsk, of course, is this spaceport that, it appears, blew up after the Sarmat class test there. That impact scar, it measured in tens of meters. It looked like a major pad or a silo accident, certainly not a minor glitch. The Sarmat program has produced only one clearly successful public launch in years, and that's despite the fact that Russian propaganda talks about Sarmat all of the time. Take a look at Baikonur, Russia's only pad for crewed Soyuz launches to the International Space Station. It has also been hit by decay. After a recent flight, Roscosmos admitted damage to multiple elements of the Baikonur launch pad. Roscosmos warned of possible delays for future crewed launches from its only manned gateway to the space station. So when your main test ranges and launch sites leave craters and broken infrastructure, you can say that your reliability is already in freefall. Nuclear deterrence is not about slogans like the Russians would like you to believe. It is built on every scheduled test happening on time and everything working as it was supposed to. Each visible failure cuts away from the image of a disciplined superpower. It is replacing that with, in fact, being a third world country that is hoping that it gets by with good luck. Now, while Russia's rear is stumbling, Ukraine is reaching deeper into Russia's territory than Moscow could have ever conceived. In the Moscow region, Ukrainian drones recently hit the Shatura power plant. That's about 120 kilometers or 75 miles from Moscow. That strike was able to damage several transformers and force emergency crews to the area. Tens of thousands of citizens were left without electricity. Each hit forces Russia to divert air defense away from the front and towards the rear to protect refineries, power plants, and depots. Ukraine is trading relatively cheap drones for high Russian fear and expensive Russian repair bills. Ukraine is forcing Russia to chase across its vast airspace to track down its drones. And we've seen, though, that the Russians have not been very successful. But that's not the only thing that is going wrong right now. Consider the fact that Yasny's very visible mishap, it lands in the middle of this campaign. It makes the Russians, at this point, look even more weak in their rear than ever before. The people of Russia, they also see this. All the NATO countries, they see this. And here in Ukraine, everybody watches and applauds. Russia is facing one failure after another. Consider the invincible, supposedly, hypersonic Kinjal missile that today is turning into a symbol of weakness. Ukrainian air defenses, backed by Western radar systems, have shut down most of the Kinjals fired at Kyiv in recent months. In fact, there's something even more cool than that. Ukrainian cyber units, known as Night Watch, say they have spoofed Kinjal navigation in several cases. That means that they fed false signals so that the missile missed their targets by wide margins. Western reports describe a string of recent launches where the expensive Kinjals simply failed to hit their targets. Each Kinjal is estimated to cost about $10 million. But a weapon that misses or is able to be fooled by software, it's not a terror tool. It's a very loud budget problem. When deep strike missiles and strategic tests both produce embarrassing footage, Russian invincibility collapses on two fronts at once. Today we see something else, though. Ukraine's long-range strikes are not just humiliating Moscow. They are cutting into Russia's ability to continue fighting. Ukraine's commander-in-chief says that Russian artillery ammunition use has practically halved in recent months. Before these deep strikes, Russian units could fire up to 40,000 shells per day along the front. Now, that figure is roughly half, after Ukraine has repeatedly hit depots and factories and rail nodes inside of Russia. Strikes have targeted ammunition plants, missile component factories, and oil refineries that feed the Russian army. A country that burns shells faster than it can replace them is definitely going to feel the pain when it loses more of its depots. Soldiers today on the line do not care what Putin says on television. They can see for their own eyes what is happening. That today, they don't have enough shells. Today, there is not enough fuel. More and more, the answer is clear. Vladimir Putin cannot control the situation in Russia. But also, the sea flank tells the same story of a Kremlin today that is losing control of its own logistics and of its own risk. Naval drones have shut down operations at major ports across Russia. Look at the one, though, in Novorossiysk on the Black Sea. That facility handles about 1% of all global oil flows. It also handles about 80% of Kazakhstan's exports to world markets. A single successful naval drone strike forced one of the main mooring points out of action. Loadings were halted and had to be rearranged. Black Sea tankers linked to Russian oil have been hit by unexplained blasts and fires on their routes. Each ship that burns or terminals that closes raises insurance costs and shifts shipping routes. This all cuts into Russia's bottom line. But a state that once used oil as a weapon is now struggling to keep its own export and its arteries open today. Today, it does not decide what happens to Russian oil. Ukraine decides what happens to Russia's oil. The Kremlin's own budget shows who is going to pay for these failures. For 2026, Russia plans to raise value-added tax from 20% to 22%. That's a direct price increase on almost every purchase that Russians make. The Kremlin today cannot afford this war. It is losing on multiple fronts, and it cannot keep up with the cost. Not only is inflation high in Russia, there's other problems. Just before the end of this year, it is expected that the ruble will devalue between 34 and 45%. Now imagine this for the average worker, somebody who can barely make ends meet. How do you survive if all of a sudden you lose a third or almost half of your income? That's going to make life very difficult. But that's the reality for Russians today. The reality for Russians today is that they cannot afford day-to-day costs. They cannot afford to continue living. And their government might ignore them, might not care about them. But at the end of the day, there is a risk when your population becomes too concerned. When your population feels that you are just stealing their money. And there's a really legitimate reason for the Kremlin to start paying attention. And it's because we've seen increasing protests in Russia. We've seen increasing numbers of people speaking out. Now, so far, it has been controlled and small. It has not spread across the country by any means. But at the same time, it has already started. The Kremlin today is in a difficult position. It is locked into this war, which is making many people at the senior levels of the Kremlin extremely wealthy. Those people at the top want to see the war continue. They do not want to see the war end. We've discussed this before, and it's very important to again highlight. The Kremlin does not operate in the interest of the Russian state. It most certainly does not operate in the interest of the Russian people. The Russian government today, led by Vladimir Putin, is nothing more than a criminal gang. It is a group of people who are set on enriching themselves. Their only objective is not ideological. They do not care about things such as national language or the other things that Russia often talks about. What they care about are not family values. What they care about is simple: how to make as much money as fast as possible. And that's why today they're milking this system for as much as they can. They understand that today this war opens incredible opportunities to make money. When else will they ever have the opportunity to go almost unchecked to produce millions of types of equipment? They have to produce equipment for the military as well as for the soldiers. They have to produce food for these people. But who gets those contracts? Who benefits from that? Well, in fact, people close to Vladimir Putin do. As always, Vladimir Putin has been very keen to make sure that his people make money. But there has been a shift. Things are changing in Moscow. Historically, Vladimir Putin made sure that different clans were well balanced. There was no fighting amongst them. And that still remains true. We see that obviously the FSB is trying to get rid of those from the military. They don't want to see those senior leaders from the military coming to Moscow with their gripes. They don't want to see their tanks rolling into Moscow. So they are trying to suppress them. But there's something else happening. Right now, there's a consolidation of control, consolidation of power. And Vladimir Putin, for the first time in his dynasty, is making a very clear public effort to make sure that more of his relatives are in senior positions. So what does that signal? How should we understand that? What does that mean? Well, it means that today Vladimir Putin understands that there's a lot of problems. Things are going bad. But that's also why he might be blinded to how bad they are. He hears they're bad, but he thinks that Russia will be able to survive them. He's been the president for 25 years. He's had many difficult situations. He assumes this one is just like the others. But it's not. This time, it is not just like the others. This time, the situation for Russia has become far, far more unstable than what he seems to appreciate. Because it's not just the fact that the costs are going up for Russians. It's not just the fact that he's lost over 1,100,000 soldiers inside of Ukraine with virtually nothing to show for it. It's that today, even Russia's nuclear deterrence is being called into question. Vladimir Putin used to have strength because he can make credible threats. But today, his threats are no longer credible. Russia may not have the capacity to do what it has always promised to do. So right now, the record is very simple. We see that Vladimir Putin does not have the capacity to continue fighting this war, and that Russia is breaking its tools for fighting war in front of the cameras. Today, Vladimir Putin's regime is being put into a very difficult position, a position from which it will eventually fall. Quite clearly, if you look at the situation in Moscow, Vladimir Putin's regime is becoming destabilized. So pay attention to what happens the next few days, next few weeks, because there's something very big and rotten in Moscow. Please like this video. Please subscribe to this channel and consider becoming a channel member today. And please, at the end of this video, when you see the opportunity to click on the next video, please do click it. It really helps us with the algorithms. As always, thank you for supporting Ukraine.